And we're live, just like that. Danielle McLaughlin, good morning from New Zealand to New York, where it's late afternoon.
It is. It's 5:12 in the PM. It is great to be here.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a blazing hot day here in New York City. You can see from the sun blazing on
Yeah,
my face.
looks good.
Yeah, yeah. It's a hot, hot summer. That's one thing this town has that people don't know about. Crazy hot summer.
Well, you join us, ironically, in a very strange time. We have joined the rest of the world. We are back with COVID in our community. The government has always said, don't expect it to stay out of the community, which I guess is right. And yeah, for people who don't know, which will probably only be people outside of New Zealand, 9:15 p.m. last night. I got an update on my phone about 8:45 last night, and it said 9:15 p.m. The Prime Minister and Ashley Bloomfield, who's kind of our Anthony Fauci, if you're watching in America, will be holding a live press conference at 9:15 p.m. And we were all like, "What the fuck? We know what this is." And yeah, we found that last night. We've got 4 cases in Auckland, back in the community that they don't know where it's come from. So we've had cases in New Zealand. We had, I think, 23, but they were all at isolation facilities. So people would come into the country, go into an isolation facility, and then there was cases there, but there was nothing in the community. So now there's 4 cases in the community. And of course, because our Prime Minister here, Jacinda Ardern, last time followed the adage of going hard, going early, she's done it again, put Auckland straight into a level 3 lockdown, and that's 3 out of 4, so that's pretty serious. And the rest of the country into a level 2 lockdown, which is actually, so I'm in Dunedin, so for people who don't know New Zealand, about 1,500 kilometres, which is what, 900 miles, is that about right? Away from Auckland, on a different island, thank the good Lord. But yeah, the New Zealanders were a bit ginger this morning and going, holy crap, we've got our final rugby game this weekend with 45,000 people at Eden Park in Auckland. I guess that's not happening now. And the country's in a little bit of shock, actually. So yeah, so that's where we're at. But I mean, you're in New York, which was a world epicenter for a while.
It was.
How is it going there as well? What's happening with you guys?
You know, I will give kudos to New York City and New York State. We've really flattened the curve in a pretty significant way. Obviously, we have more than 4 cases here, not only in the city but in the state. But we, from about March, sort of early March onward, everything shut down. Kids came out of school. Everyone was wearing masks. We were going to the supermarket and washing our groceries when they came back.
Yeah.
Gloves, like the whole full 9 yards. So really everything came to a sort of a crashing halt. Nobody was going into the office unless, of course, you were an essential worker and you had to, be somewhere, you had to be at a hospital, or you had to be on the subway, be a caregiver. But the whole world came to a screeching halt. And we are still, we have opened up slowly. So here in New York now, you can sit outside and eat at a restaurant. On the open air, you can't still go into a restaurant. Some of the camps for kids, which is important for me because I have a couple of kids, camps have opened, but social distancing, a lot of them are at half capacity, that kind of a thing. We're all still wearing masks. Every time I go out, I wear a mask. That's pretty common.
Yeah.
And it is very much encouraged as one really clear and easy way to stop transmission. And we're just waiting. We're supposed to go back into schools in September, so only 3 or 4 weeks from now. I suspect that even if we go in, it'll only be a couple of days a week live in person. And, if there's COVID in your school or COVID in your class, you're going to be out for 2 weeks. So I honestly don't think that things will be anywhere near normal until next summer here in New York, at least.
I wonder, I mean, really, normality will only come probably when there's a vaccine. And I mean, people are talking about the depending if you're Trump, you say 1917, but other people say 1918 Spanish flu. I don't know why he continues. I think he liked the movie 1917, so he's got it stuck in his head. But I know my father was in the polio epidemic in 1948, so he caught polio. And really oh, okay, wow. The only way that polio ended up disappearing kind of from the face of the planet was a vaccine. Wow. So you're saying next summer, I mean, probably the caveat is as long as there's a vaccine, because if there's not, and it still keeps going around and around, so what's just happened here in New Zealand is that, as I said, we've had cases in isolation, but these are the first cases in the community, so they're not associated with someone who is in an isolated facility from the plane. So probably what's happened, and the reason that the government has been saying it will get back into our community at some stage is, those planes that are coming in, they have staff on them. People at the borders are having people come through. So someone who is asymptomatic, who is let's say a pilot or a steward or a security guard at the airport, has gone into a supermarket, they've put COVID on the door handle, and these other family members have picked it up from there. So that means there's no way of tracking where it's come from. And so that's the difference, and that's what's happened. And so we've just shut down for 3 days. Auckland, as I said, is level 3, which is pretty strict. There's no school straight away. So our government and health experts went straight in and said, right, we want to find out where this has come from. Everything's shutting down in Auckland, which is where it is, and the rest of the country, you're on sort of standby. So not too much has changed. I've got meetings on in town today I'm still going to, but things are on standby for the rest of us.
I think it's harder actually to go back into it probably. We are in it now. We don't have any anticipation of leaving it anytime soon. And I think it's probably worse to go back because you've clawed back your sort of normal life to many extents. And to go back, I think, is really hard for people. I mean, I agree with you, Pat. This is not going to be anywhere close to normal until a vaccine. There are phase trials going on. Oxford University has a vaccine, Moderna here in the US. I mean, I think there's something like 30 vaccines being tested. Of course, Russia's vaccine is apparently working now, if you listen to Putin.
Of course it is.
But it's one thing to have a vaccine that works. It's another thing to distribute it. Some of them have to be frozen. I mean, just the logistics of this thing are crazy. Who gets it first? I guess it's healthcare workers. I wouldn't say it's a brave new world, but it's the world there. This new normal is. We're not going to go back to the old ways for a considerable period of time.
Well, and it's also the unknown. I mean, obviously not to compare COVID to the flu as in the seriousness of it, but to compare it to the flu in the cyclical nature of it. We still don't know if there's going to be a COVID-20 or then a COVID-21 or then a COVID-22. So even though we're talking about the potentially vaccination for this, if there's another strand that comes out, it may not cover that. So this could be, on some level, the start of how the planet operates from now on, which probably means in a really horribly depressive way that until there's sort of a herd immunity, that, this is life. Outbreaks, shut down a town, continue on with life for others. I don't know. It's a bit scary, actually.
Yeah, and I think your point is this has to be done in a way that is driven by facts and science, right? So we can't just say, there's a lot of this conversation here in the States right now, and there's a lot, you compare Florida's response, for example, where they just keep everything open, and the most important thing was the economy. You know what? You're not going to have an economy if people are dying of this disease and people are too afraid to go out because they don't trust public health authorities or they don't trust the government to tell them what's really going on. But this has to be led by, contact tracing if you can get it, by basic hygiene. Masks go an enormous way to stopping transmission. Testing, which helps with transition, but of course you can get a test and then an hour later you can get it, right? So the only thing, and this is sort of the thing we keep circling around, is it has to be a vaccine.
Yeah.
For us to, get back to where things were.
Yeah, and it's funny because I kind of, and obviously we had lockdown here for, I think it was 5 weeks, and during that lockdown I did like 35 podcasts. I did a lot of podcasts, and obviously a topic of conversation with everyone at some stage was COVID. And I likened it then, and it's sort of when you talk about the herd immunity, if that was going to be a thing, I liken it then to when the English went around the world taking smallpox to the indigenous people, because it was a new disease that their immunities had no way of defending. It's kind of what this is, but it's for the world. It's not just it's the indigenous people of the planet who are getting hit by this, though, not just the poor brown people in a small part of the world that the English thought they'd decide to own.
Right.
So yeah, it's just fascinating. It's interesting as well. I had a conversation with someone a few weeks ago, and they said that the longer it goes on, the more chance it is to get back into the community. And they were someone who they didn't work for a medical institution, but they knew people who did, and they said the medical institutions were starting to rebuild up some of their stocks, not because they knew anything, but they knew the longer this goes on, the higher the chances go up. And when I heard that, I was like, well, that's really interesting. And then Vietnam happened last week, and for those who don't know, Vietnam had no deaths, and they were like New Zealand with 99 days without any cases, and then the cases came back, and then the deaths started, and I kind of went, oh shit, this is for real. So last week I actually got online and I ordered a whole bunch of stuff, and yesterday, what turns up? Whole bunch of masks. So that just happened to turn up yesterday in my from a courier, and I bought some of those neck gaiters that you put up and over your face, sort of thing. Yeah. And I bought last week a whole. I didn't go crazy, but I just sort of updated my cleaning cupboard. You know, I made sure I had some antibacterial wipes, and I did all that last week and got the cupboard, the overflow cupboard I call it, sorted out last week. And then last night I'm like, holy crap. That was good timing. Unfortunately, I would like to have never had to have used them, but just by chance, then yesterday we find out, you know, back in the country. So
yeah, and the asymptomatic spread is, I think, one of the biggest problems here, right? So if you feel unwell, it's easy to kind of stay at home or do whatever you need to do. But the fact that it can be spread and just through respirating, right? So just through, you know, breathing.
Yeah.
It's got so many hallmarks that make this just thing really, really difficult to beat. And I wanted to pick up on something you said about smallpox and, you know, the English sort of going around the world and bringing this disease. You know, we have seen here in the States because of the way healthcare is set up here in the system, which really you get healthcare if you have a job, if you're certain a job, you know, often a white collar job, and there are plenty of jobs where you don't get healthcare. And so there is healthcare provided by the government for sort of for a certain level of, you know, income.
Mm-hmm.
What Obamacare had tried to do back in the day was sort of bridge the gap between health insurance you would get from your insurer and then sort of the Medicare, Medicaid, low income insurance.
Yep.
But what is happening is, because there are so many people without access to good healthcare, and that's just going to the doctor once a year and, you know, getting a checkup, some of that preventative stuff, it's hitting low socioeconomic communities much harder because they have pre-existing conditions, they have comorbidities, maybe their diet isn't as good. So we're seeing, you know, socioeconomic racial disparities in how this disease is affecting us, and you could draw a straight line between that and the American healthcare system. So in one sense, you know, Kiwis are very lucky, and you know, there's no healthcare system that's perfect.
Yeah.
But you can get to a doctor and you can get a checkup and you can get to the dentist, and you don't have to be making a certain amount of money to be able to do that. And that's crucial for any society, but especially when you're dealing with a pandemic like this.
Yeah, and it's one of the things. Again, it's not a gloating thing, but it's one of the things I enjoy, because I talk to Americans on a fairly regular basis on this podcast, especially now seeing we've gone sort of digital. And I'll show you something. Talk to these guys. Lovely girls.
You're not counting in those Americans, I hope.
No, but I
thought you could always be a Kiwi.
I'm talking to a Kiwi in America. I talked to these girls a couple of weeks ago, who are they are.
They wrote. I can read it. Trump 2020 songwriters.
Yeah, heavy supporters of Trump. So this is their song. Let me get this up a bit.
If we give it away, it's time to vote. It's time to pray. Let's join as one. Let me hear you say, vote Trump.
So this is their Vote Trump 2020 girls, and it was really interesting when you talk about the healthcare. And look, I'm not taking the piss out of them. They were lovely. I really want to talk to them again, because I'm people will be sick of me saying this, but I take in on American politics intravenously. Like, I get up in the morning and the first thing I do after I've woken up is I check my phone to see if Trump's blowing up the world yet, or the top half of the world, that sort of thing. But it was really interesting to hear them talking about the medical world in America. And they talked about their brother who had the flu and went to a doctor and got, I think they said, a CAT scan or something like that, and he came out with like a $3,500 bill, and I was like, well, of course, because the medical fraternity in America is for profit, and if they can figure out a way, I mean, if I can upsell you a pair of laces with your new boots, of course I'm going to do it, because I'm in a shop that sells shoes and I want to make more money, so I'll sell you some laces and some, you know, some dubbin, as we used to call it when I played rugby, to waterproof your boots as well, and all sorts of things. If you're in a for-profit medical situation, they're going to upsell you. And I said, this is, and then I explained to them what would happen if he was in New Zealand. He'd spend $40 or $50 to go to his GP. The GP would go, well, you've got the flu. That's it's a viral thing. There's not much we can do. Here's some Panadol. Here's something. Here's your $5 thing at the pharmacy. Go home, take lots of fluids, and stay in touch. And that'd be it. And they were like, what? And you want to jump in, but I'll just set this last point. The thing that was interesting is the more we talked about it, the more what they were saying that they didn't like lined up with Bernie. They didn't like the for-profit. They didn't like the way that the medical world was done. And I was like, well, why aren't you supporting Bernie? They didn't like the way colleges were done and people were coming out with debts. And I'm like, okay, so, free, you know what I mean? It was like, but
yeah.
So when they talked out their policies, there were so many that the left would have lined up better with them, but they couldn't do it because they were evangelical Christians on the right. It was amazing. It was an amazing conversation.
Yeah. And you saw that actually in the last cycle. So, 2016, after Bernie Sanders, didn't make it all the way to the primary, you saw not an insignificant number of Bernie Sanders voters actually voted for Trump. Like, that was something that certainly helped Trump.
Yeah.
Into the presidency. And there's this vein of populism, right, that ran through both of those campaigns, different in many respects. And, you can't, if it's, you're never going to get somebody who cares deeply about their sort of evangelical beliefs really to switch over. Abortion is a really big, dividing line that will prevent people from voting for a Democrat who thinks that you should be able to access that service if you need it. So it's a bright line. It's really a bright line, even if you think that maybe Trump is not particularly moral. Maybe you think he's a sinner and he's, can be saved. I think that's a part of it. But there are some bright lines that some people just are unwilling to cross, and that's exactly what you're seeing with those two young ladies.
And it's funny because the last election, obviously most people who follow politics, whether you agree with his politics or not, will agree that Bernie was pretty much railroaded. But different this time around. They kind of, they got around Biden and they did it in a democratic way. It was surprising how quickly it happened, but they did do it in a democratic way. But now they're looking at the DNC coming up, and they've got fucking Ana Navarro speaking and not AOC, and it's obvious that Biden is moving away from those progressives and towards sort of the liberal Republicans and the Democrats. He's kind of setting himself up for center, right, and left. But even in this age, Americans call it the far left. I mean, here in New Zealand, you'd be a Green Party member. It's not that. It's not that. Radical. It's further left, but it's not like, oh my God, they want free healthcare.
Right, it's not actual socialism.
No. But it's just fascinating that they seem so terrified to remain corporate, financial, rather than progressive, that they'd rather align them. And I like Ana Navarro. I've actually approached Ana Navarro to come on the podcast, but they'd rather give space during a DNC for a Republican who may, I guess, call herself independent now, or a lifelong Republican, than they would someone who is fighting for left principles and values, through and through. It's fascinating. And I think Joe Biden obviously is the front runner at the moment and the favorite, but I was watching David Pakman the other day, and he pointed out, the words just jumped out of my head. When you have like a plus or minus 3.4% margin of error. And he said, you can look at some of these polls and the margin of error can get it within 2%. And if you're within 2% in real numbers, it doesn't take much to kind of even that out. And then you look at the national vote versus the college vote, or whatever they call it. And it's, even though he's front runner, I'm not trying to play it up. It's not over yet. It's not game over quite yet.
No, it's not. There's this famous thing in American politics too called the October surprise, which in 2016 was the Comey letter, and of course we had Podesta emails and other things where WikiLeaks was certainly trying to and Russia behind them, trying to make sure that Clinton was wounded. And even that result was within the margin of error, right? It was a couple of percent. She won the popular vote. She won the most votes, but she didn't win them where it mattered. Biden has always been a centrist guy, right? So in that respect, I think that the sort of the ideology that's represented in the convention is certainly representative of him. And it just, within the last half hour, we've learned that Kamala Harris he's chosen her to be his running mate. She's also not particularly, progressive. She's to the left of centre, of course, but the ticket itself is not extremely progressive. The other thing is, the convention is there for a couple of reasons, right? One is to make the planks for the election and sort of show the country where the Democratic Party will go and where Biden will go if he leads the country. But importantly in this election is they need to win the centre, right? So the centre is bigger than it's ever been. Independents have always played a really important role in American, presidential elections, and none more so than now. So I think they're playing it safe, frankly, because it's so important for them to win. And there will be other ways in which the progressive arm, the AOC, I actually thought AOC was speaking. I thought I saw that. But Navarro is, she's a sort of a former Republican. She's somebody who is upset and disgusted with Trump, and she's obviously there to represent the people who are wavering, who voted for Trump. Plenty of those people voted for Obama before him. Not plenty, but there's certainly a number that did, more than you would expect. So it's a strategic decision on the part of the Democrats to win and take care of the progressive stuff once they actually have the power to do anything.
I think that's the thing that I find fascinating, though, because if that was the plan, you'd go, yeah, okay, so get in office and then make the changes and move further to the left. And I don't believe that's going to happen, because it was like when Obama got in, hope and change, and it was a mighty new wave. And Obamacare is amazing, and it's a good starting point. But it seems that I talked about the word corporate. Why do all the big oil companies give money to both sides? Because there's a layer of corporate politics first, financial rewards, and then below that comes left and right and how that works out, because they're all about the financial outcome and the win there. Look, I get it, but I guess what I'm saying is, and look, I don't vote in America, so my opinion means jack shit, but if that was the plan, they've never done it before. And it just seems with Joe, the plan is, let's pretend these last 4 years haven't happened. We'll go back to where we were, and we'll kind of start again and relaunch the way politics should work. But if we go do that, then there's a whole group of Americans and a voting bloc that's getting bigger on what the Americans call far left, probably what we would call in New Zealand here the left, who aren't being used. I mean, they're not. I think they're also going to. I read the other day they're using Ana Navarro, going to Ana Navarro to help with the Latino vote, rather than going to Bernie's campaign, who were massively popular with the Latino voters. It just seems to be a funny way to kind of go, we're family, we're fighting for the same values, but you guys can sit in the corner, we'll look after you after the election, and we'll just get through. And I guess what I'm saying is, every time that's happened, we'll look after you after the election, they've never looked after them. And I wonder if some people will be at a breaking point. But let me say one more thing. There was a really interesting bit of research I read the other day, and it seems that at the last election, people who hated both candidates broke heavily for Trump. But this time when they do the research, people who hate both candidates are breaking heavily for Biden. And that seems to be a big part of the difference. Rather than the centre, it's like, who thinks these guys are both dicks? Okay, now who are you going to vote for? And a huge number of them are voting for Biden. And that could be a massive difference in the final tally once they have the election day.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think the likability factor, which is a word that I really hate to use, especially when you're talking about women in politics, but Hillary Clinton, she was always very popular when she was in office, but she tended to not do so well campaigning. The likability factor, was just something that she didn't have that charisma. She didn't resonate with people. She had a long history, which is a lot of baggage, obviously, in politics with her husband, and they've just been in the public eye for a really long time. Biden is the guy that Trump pretends to be. He's a guy, he's born in Pennsylvania. You know, he took the train from Delaware. He's like, he truly is. He's always been that guy, right? You hear people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain. So some of course, John McCain is no longer with us, but people in politics on both sides of the aisle always spoke highly of him. And I think that says something about him, and that resonates with people, right? People love Trump. Even the people who love Trump can admit that he's uncouth, and they sort of like that about him, right? They like that he's shaking things up. They like that he doesn't care about sort of norms and traditions. They like that they feel like he's one of them. But actually, Joe Biden really is one of them, one of us. And you can't. I think ultimately, if you put those two records toe to toe, people will break for Biden. I think he's just a more authentic. He's just a more sort of authentic character.
Yeah, I think you're. I mean, I agree with you. The only thing is, I think the downside for Joe Biden is he can get tied to a lot of those things that people didn't like about Hillary. Now, I don't think it's going to be enough this time around to keep him out. But whether it's laws reforming, the criminal world back in the 90s or whatever, he can be tied to those same things. And when Trump came in and basically, fooled the world by going, I'm an everyman, whilst literally sitting on a golden toilet, he managed to pull the wool. And I just think there's probably enough people who had the wool pulled over their eyes at the last one who won't do it again. It's like when Brexit happened. When Brexit happened, there was a new thing came out called remorse. And the weeks after Brexit, there was a whole bunch of people who had remorse because they realised they'd been tricked by the politicians.
By Farage and others, right? That red bus told them that the NHS would get whatever it was, £1 million a week, whatever it was. It was some insane amount of money.
Yep.
It was just an infomercial.
Yeah.
It didn't mean anything, but it was brilliant in the sense that it really connected with people and their upset and unhappiness about Europe and the money that was going there and their sense of sort of sovereignty and patriotism. So it's a political genius in some respects, but at some point people wake up.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happened for. Maybe it might only be 5% of the voters, it might be 5%, but then again, Trump won by 77,000 votes in one county, sort of thing. So 5% of the voters changing is a massive win for Biden, and it looks more likely that it'll be 7, 8, 9, 10% swing back towards him at the moment. Although, as you say, October's a prize.
I mean, that's why Kanye West is a favorite of the GOP right now, because Trump won by less than Jill Stein's third-party vote. So if she had not been in the race, Clinton would have won. It's that tight in those there's sort of 8 swing states. What the campaign right now has got to be worrying about is places like Florida and Texas, where COVID is getting really, really bad. Where their state and local government has just not done what needed to be done because they would like to pretend it away and just ran with the economy being the most important thing. And some of the polling coming out of those states is looking terrible for an incumbent Republican president. It's not to say that won't change, but if he loses Florida, it's over. If he loses Texas, it's over. So those are very important states. Anything can happen.
It was fascinating the other day when he was talking about, how I've always been confused as to why mail-in voting is going to cause, people to cheat, but why they always think they're only going to cheat for the Democrats. Yeah, I mean, okay, let's say 10% of voters do cheat, and it's nothing like that. It never has been. But who says it's not 6% of the Republicans that are cheating? And you know what I mean? It's like, that's the weirdest thing. But I laughed out loud the other day when obviously someone in the White House said, if you scare people away from mail-out voting, there's a lot of old people in Florida, they just may not go in. And so he put out a tweet saying, mail-in voting's fine in Florida, but other places it's bad. He's hilarious, man. I don't mean in a good way. He's...
I mean, the hypocrisy is astounding. This is somebody who... President himself has done his own, his absentee voted or mail-in ballots for any number of elections. And, this idea that voter fraud only happens on the left is a complete lie. And frankly, voter fraud is a relatively rare occurrence. There have been a number of studies, both with mail-in and then with traditional in-person voting, and the level of sort of fraud is some minute percentile. So it's just a way of scaring people. And the unfortunate thing about this mail-in thing in COVID is my great concern, and even though mail-in voting is very secure, my great concern is that there will be some level of fraud. I have concerns about, don't think I'm going to put a tinfoil hat on my head, but I worry about Russia interference,
Right.
and I worry about there being some anomalies with mail-in voting that are caused by some external actor, and all of the Democrats who had said, oh, it's perfectly fine, there's nothing to worry about, will have egg on their face, and a president who is already setting up smoke signals about the illegitimacy of this pending election is going to just stomp all over this democratic process, and we're going to be in even more of a crisis than we already are.
And I mean, I don't know if you watch the Young Turks, but the guy who runs the Young Turks, Cenk, has been saying for months he's not leaving office. Even if he loses, he's not leaving office. But I think that you look at guys like Lindsey Graham, you look at these old school guys, I can't imagine them backing Trump if he loses to not walk out. It's like I can't imagine it would go that far, because the one thing that has happened a couple of times is Trump is tried some things that haven't worked because of the political process hasn't allowed them to work. And I think that that's one of the things that I can't imagine happening, because basically the whole Senate, the whole Republican Senate would have to get behind him staying, and it's just, I can't see it. I can't see the process allowing that to happen.
I tend to agree with you, and one example of what you're talking about is about a week ago, he sent up this trial balloon saying that he wanted to change the date of the election, which is something that he can't do as president. It's set by Congress. And I was actually on air at Fox Business, and Marsha Blackburn, who is a Tennessee senator, was very clear that this was never happening. Lindsey Graham, he got no backing up. He got no backup from any Republicans, any of the senior Republicans. What could happen, and I think back to Bush v. Gore in 2000, so if there are issues with mail-in ballots, and if there are issues, this could end up in the Supreme Court. But I do think there will be a transition of power on January 20th or 21st. I do worry that a president that we've seen is pretty unconstrained by norms and traditions, if it's clear that he lost in a landslide, or even that he lost, the transition period between the election and the inauguration, which is a couple of months, November to January, I worry a little bit what an unconstrained Trump will do and will be capable of, because even halfway through, or the beginning of his term, when he really had to play the politics and sort of dot his I's and cross his T's, he's shown that he doesn't really have a great regard for sort of the rules of the game.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I can think about saying is that he seems to be the person in the world with the least amount of self-awareness that I've ever seen. So I don't think he's going to be able to go, how will this look if I make this stand? It's just like, it's almost like he runs on instinct. Like how a dog will they don't have emotions, they just run on instinct. They just, A happens in front of them, so they must react B. They have no choice on how they react. It's an instinct thing. And I think if he loses, he's probably got an instinct to fight and push back again, and he won't have the ability to be self-reflective and go, how will this look and how will this affect me and my family for the next 100 years? Will we be seen as this, or if he graciously left, I don't know, maybe that would save his presidency on some level, to go, well, he obeyed the rule of law and he was gracious when he left and he congratulated Joe Biden. I can't imagine any of that happening. But it seems to me that that would be the only thing that could sort of help him in any way post being president. Because if he doesn't, he's going to be a pariah in society by probably, I know they always talk about 35%, but probably by 70 to 8% of the country.
So this is where I differ with you. I actually think that, he has a very, very strong loyal base, and because he has already so clearly used the presidency to his own ends, right? The Trump DC hotel is making millions for him and his family. He wanted to have the G7 at one of his Florida resorts. He talked about having, you know, there's no line between politics and the public fisc and then the office. It's all just sort of him, right? So because he has a pretty strong base and he has worked up such a strong sense of grievance, his own grievance, their grievance, you know, it's sort of part of his brand now. So I can see a media empire spinning out of this. I honestly think that's what he wanted to do in the first place. There were whispers of that, you know, in the last election. Of course, no one was as shocked as him to find out that he had actually won. So how do you parlay that base into to loyal customers? Honestly, so I think that the kind of, you know, the fight to stay actually is completely on brand, and he was never going to win anyone back, honestly, after these last 4 years. But he can maintain a loyal base.
And I guess one of the things, like I remember when Bill O'Reilly had the biggest show in American cable, I was doing a mid-dawn show on News Talk ZB at the time, and proportionally my mid-dawn show was bigger than his per capita. But of course, because America is a market of 300 million plus, it means that his 3 million listeners or viewers or whatever it was a massive market to actually advertise to. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, so even if 80% of the country hates him, that's still 60 to 70 million people who love him that he can then, you know, sell his Trump stakes to and whatever else he wants to do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's one American network which is sort of to the right of Fox here.
Yeah.
I could easily see that kind of that becoming the building block of an empire. Because it's also legacy for the brand, it's legacy for the name, it's legacy for his family, and it would completely reflect, you know, his politics, his policy, and it becomes sort of this continuation of his presidency in some respects. So I guess we watch the space, right? He could be back in the Oval for another 4 years and then go to Trump TV.
What is he now? He's like 75, 76, 77?
Yeah, something like that. I thought he was 72.
Oh, okay. So yeah, right. Oh, well, that's, I mean, you know, so he could do another 4 years. But then again, yeah.
74.
70,
Thank you, Google.
Thank you, Google. Ask Siri. I do that all the time with Siri. Siri, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? Oh, I probably shouldn't say that. My phone will fire up. Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say, though, that odds on Joe Biden will be the next president. But, yeah, I mean, people talk about the polls last time around and how the polls were so wrong. The polls weren't wrong because the polls said that Clinton would win the national vote by 3%, and she won by something like 2.1%, the national vote. Where they got it wrong was in the states. And so it's a bit different saying that some of the polls are saying he's winning the national vote by 10 or 12 or 14%, but yeah.
But we're still a long way out, you know, and I think for many of us who didn't think it could happen last time around, there's a little bit of once bitten, twice shy, because you know, I remember so clearly when James Comey wrote the letter to Congress correcting his testimony about the Clinton investigation about 11 days before the election, and basically notifying them, because he had sworn under oath that the investigation was closed, he had to correct the record, correct his testimony so he hadn't perjured himself.
Yeah.
And it was reopened, and, you know, it was, you could just see, you saw the trend lines, you know. Obviously the stuff was graph. So, you know, I'm expecting some Ukraine shenanigans. I'm expecting the Hunter Biden stuff to come up again. Kamala Harris, now that they have a VP target to fire pot shots at, we'll see her record being examined. And I just tweeted about this before we came on air together. But it's an interesting quagmire for the campaign. So on the one hand, you know, Biden's like an old white guy, right? So the attacks that Trump could lobby against him really reflect back on him. They talk about his decline, you know, they talk about him being in politics, and it's like, well, you're also an old white guy. That we've seen some stuff is a little bit troubling as it relates to your own faculties. Yep. Oh, and by the way, you're now the insider, right? You're the insider. You're the guy on the Oval. And then he's trying to run on the sort of law and order platform, but Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor, which hurts her with progressives, and we could talk about that, but how do you fight against the thing that you are? I mean, it's from a campaign perspective, it's going to be tricky for them, I think.
Well, because one of the big things that was always there for Trump was the economy, and of course with COVID, the economy is dog shit at the moment. So if he doesn't have the economy, where does he go next, and how does he fight them?
Well, exactly. No, and that was always again, speaking of, he's always, you know, you see it with his properties and the presidency, you can draw a direct line between, he's unlike many politicians. He's never been afraid to sort of adopt things as his own. So he said, the economy is good because of me. If you don't vote for me, your retirement savings will go down the toilet. He sort of he projects himself, I guess, into the presidency and into these sort of economic indicators in a way that we haven't really seen, certainly in US presidential politics. But the problem is when you own it on the way up, you own it on the way down. And to your point, Pat, it was always going to be the economy that he was going to run on. And honestly, most second-term presidents do, Clinton came out of impeachment. But when you don't have the economy, that's why honestly I think another October surprise might be a vaccine.
Right. Yeah, I think the irony being, and for people who are watching us from America, and I talked about this with David Packman the other day, is that one of the reasons our Prime Minister Jacinda is up on 50-60% approval at the moment is the response to COVID, and purely the response to COVID. It's the same as when we had a right-wing Prime Minister, right-wing. John Key had a massive approval rating when we had the Christchurch earthquakes. It's like in the times of disaster, if a country can get behind their leader, they become popular. So basically, I don't want to make it sound flippant, but Trump could have won this easily if the response to COVID had been appropriate. He could have been the savior, and he could have been easily riding high in the polls like other leaders are, but he completely balls it up, and it doesn't matter what people say about how it's about states and you could never stop it coming in. It's like, I was watching, I can't remember the name. There was a news source that often follows Trump and follows his live speeches and fact checks them in real time. It might be called Now This or something like that. Anyway, they've a couple of times done the timeline while they've been waiting for Trump to come to the podium. And when you hear what happened through March and April and him still holding events and going and playing golf and times when other countries were locked down, you have to go culpability. I mean, not complete fault because it's a virus, but some culpability. He could have been the savior, and he's kind of the court jester without being funny.
No, and I do agree. These are United States. We have a federal government. There's a reason why pandemic preparedness was one of the kind of top 3 things that the Obama administration tried to impress on this incoming government. Because, we've dealt with SARS, we've dealt with MERS, we dealt with Ebola. This is not new. It's not like people didn't know that this was likely to happen at some point. And the idea that we did not have a national response is indicated in the fact that we have a quarter of the cases on the entire planet.
Yeah.
We are this is a civilized nation with advanced healthcare, and we have a quarter of the cases. And that's because it has been politicized, because also that's his instinct again, right? He doesn't really know how to do it any other way. And I'll be honest with you, this hit blue states first, this hit California, and this hit New York. And there has even been reporting that Jared Kushner and others decided that they didn't want to do a national response because they didn't want to help blue states. And it just can't work like that. And he's managed to do that and play politics. Things like disaster relief. You think about the way that he dealt with Puerto Rico during the hurricanes and the extent to which some of the aid is still not in Puerto Rico because they aren't his voters. They aren't his people. And so what I think is one of the great tragedies of this presidency is that he is not the president for all.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in his pandemic response. And I think it will ultimately be the thing, barring, some other, who knows what could happen, but this could be the thing that brings him down because you can't gaslight a virus.
Yeah.
And this was America's hour of need, and he was just missing in action.
Well, as you say that, I do think back to Obama. It sounds like we're having a blooming reflection on 2016 on some level and beyond. But I remember when it might have been Sandy. Was it the storm that came through New Jersey and New York?
Yep, Hurricane Sandy.
Hurricane Sandy. And what's the name of the governor of New York? Big dude.
I think you're thinking, yes.
And he thanked Obama for Obama's, help helping his constituents in his area, and some of the GOP ripped him apart for thanking the opposition, president. But that's the job. Those people were in need. The president stepped up and helped, and appropriately so. Christie said, "Thanks for your help. Well done."
It shouldn't be so hard to be a human being. I'm serious. I reflect on this a lot, actually, with New Zealand politics. And I think a lot about Jacinda's success and just the empathy that she has shown. And she has been faced with, these crises. You think about the Christchurch, the mass shooting in Christchurch, and now COVID-19. But you know what? She responded as a human.
Yeah. And
at the end of the day, it strikes me, actually, that it's not that hard to be a human in these places and respond in this way. And there's something weird and awful and self-selecting, I guess, about politics maybe here, that you're not getting empathetic responses. You are the first place people go is politics. And I think the other reason for that is the institutional makeup of this country and the fact that we have a two-party system. And so it's not designed around coalition building. It is designed around partisanship. And we have for the last 40, 50 years, the left and the right have been in lockstep, marching away from each other. So I think the self-selection, this personality thing, I think we need more women in politics, frankly. But it shouldn't be that hard to be a human. And unfortunately, we see this failing time and time again.
And it's reflected in sort of the quote from our Prime Minister through this whole period was, "Be kind to one another." Jacinda was saying it again, and it was said last night, be kind. In fact, I have seen photos of, obviously you're a Kiwi, the Auckland motorways, they have the big, like most motorways around the world do, have big signs above the motorways that tell people what the traffic's like. And during the lockdown, those were saying things like, "Be kind," on our motorway over bridges. So, yeah, and it also makes me think about America and the it is a group of states that are united, but really it feels a lot of the time like it's not. And I was talking to another commentator, Dave Rubin, during the lockdown, and he was basically one of these right-wingers. He is one of these, and I don't mean this in an offensive way, it's just their belief that smaller government is always better. And I don't believe that. And I tried to convince him, Dave, that the saying should be not big government is better or small government is better, but better government is better. You want a better government, and that might mean sometimes you need more people in it. Like, for example, if it's the fire department, I'd rather have more. That's a government department. I'd rather have more firefighters than fewer. So actually, a bigger fire department I think would be better necessarily than a smaller. And I didn't say this to him when we were talking, but I reflected on it afterwards. I think the perfect example of that is during the start of COVID with America, when the states were auctioning against each other for PPE and putting the price up, whereas what should have happened is the centralised government should have gone to these places and went, "I want 2 billion of these and I want your best price," and then ship them out to the states. And I just think
and ship them where they're needed first. That's exactly, I couldn't agree more. The idea that we didn't need a centralized response in this instance, it's just there's no way to argue that it wasn't exactly what we needed. And for states to be bidding against each other for the stuff that healthcare workers needed, so that they didn't get COVID as they are. And honestly, the way that the hospitals were here in New York overrun, emergencies overrun. The whole hospital. So I'm exposed to NYU because of a family member of mine, and I'm at NYU a lot. That entire hospital was COVID. The entire emergency room was COVID. Wow. The entire children's emergency room was COVID, and half of the children's floors were COVID. I mean, we were completely overrun. So the idea that states are bidding against each other for N95 masks is just utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I go back even to the preamble of the Declaration of Independence here. I mean, it starts with "we the people." The idea that you shouldn't have any government is just sort of farcical. And we could talk about the contours, and to your point, Pat, where do we need it? Where is it smart to have it? Where is there bulk? Where is there fraud? Where is there waste? Where are we slowed down? Where is there too much bureaucracy? But the idea that centralized government doesn't have a role to play here or anywhere else it's just not a serious position to take.
Yeah, and look, I've said it for 20 years of broadcasting, and having not maybe these necessarily kinds of conversations. This is a fairly new thing, this lovely internet stuff, but good government is good government. End of conversation. If it's I always think about the BP oil spill, and you look at the kind of regulations they had around there, and the number of people they had inspecting those oil rigs like once a year if they were lucky. That might have been a place where more people employed would have been better. A little bit more girth in those departments would have been better. So I hate this whole bigger is worse and smaller is better, and it's like we want good government, whatever that means. And I love America and I love Americans and I love a lot about it, but the flip side as well is the idea of there is a lot of libertarian views running through Americans, even if they aren't libertarian. It's about my rights and you hear that a lot, and you're seeing a lot on YouTube at the moment. I've got the right not to wear a mask in your store. It's like actually you don't. No shoes, no shirt, no service. Actually, I can say no mask, no service. But there is a sector of America that talk about my rights. My rights, you must serve me in your store without a mask. These are my rights. Don't squash my rights. And it's probably one of the other things that has really helped COVID go crazy in America is this philosophy of individualism as opposed to community, in my opinion.
No, and this is one of the facets of what they call American exceptionalism, right? So you think about the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the Bill of Rights, and they are the rights. Those are sort of the preemptive individual rights: rights of speech, rights of association, rights of liberty. The Second Amendment, of course, the right to bear arms, and so on and so on. So there is a very, very deep, you're right, a very deep structural, sort of institutional, social, political thread that runs through American life and has for since its existence, since its founding, where the right of the individual has been raised above the right of the right of the rights of the community. And you have seen amazing things come from that. So the, sort of this the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans, the contributions that have been made to space, to even the Constitution itself its ideals have been exported around the world and shown in other countries' founding documents. But in a time like this, you can't forget that you're indelibly a part of a community. And that goes whether we're talking about, protecting national parks. There has to be some commonality in a political system within a country, and you have to be able to think about the needs of others and hope that they're thinking about your needs. And mask wearing is exactly that thing. I wear it for me, but I also wear it for you, because I give a shit about you. And we need to see more of that. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if COVID will change the way Americans think about that, and it's of course not all Americans, but I have a right to life. I have a right to not get sick. It's not like people are being asked to do very much, but because it becomes politicized, it becomes this huge thing. It becomes a symbol. Yeah. And it's just not where you need this to be effective. This just needs to be something we get to work at, and we just get it done.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I remember, how long have you been in America for? How long have you been over there?
20 years.
Wow.
Terrifying. Oh, no, hang on. No, sorry. No, about 17. I left New Zealand in 99.
Okay.
So I've been out about 21 years, and I've been here about 17. I was in the UK first, lived in London, of course, predictably. And then I've been here since the sort of early 2000s.
So you obviously as a Kiwi though, you'll keep an eye on New Zealand politics, I'm sure. So you'll know Rodney Hyde, the name and the man.
Of course.
He used to come in, and I remember interviewing him a few times. And for those who aren't aware of New Zealand politics, he is what we would call our far right party act, and he was very much libertarian. And he said to me in an interview, I always vote for what brings freedom. That's what I vote for. I vote for what brings freedom. And I used to say to him, but sometimes when you bring freedom to one area, by definition, you oppress another.
Correct.
So if you always vote for freedom, how do you stop impacting other groups? And the example of the masks in America, my freedom not to wear a mask, well, actually, my freedom not to catch COVID off you as well. So one person's freedom is sort of, could be seen as, and I'm being a bit dramatic, but another person's oppression, you know?
I totally agree with you, and I actually think healthcare is a great example of that. So, you know, one of the things that libertarians talk about here with small government and making, you know, not having socialized healthcare, you know, Obamacare being this terrible, bureaucratic, you know, nightmarish government, you know, behemoth that will take away your freedom. How free are you if you're too sick to work?
Yeah.
I mean, how free are you if you can't get to a doctor? There are ways, I really strongly believe, that government can and should exist to preserve freedom, not to take it away. But, you know, healthcare is one thing where, you know, if you're sick, you can't do anything. You can't exercise any of those purported freedoms. So the idea that, you know, government is oppressive and it's strangling us and it's smothering us, I think is also, there are huge problems with taking that position in some instances, and I think health, this pandemic, are two really important examples. And also regulation. You know, I don't want chemicals. I'm looking at the East River. You know, if we have small government, we don't have you know, regulations that monitor what goes into this East River, then I can't go out there and enjoy that river. I can't go and walk along it. So it actually does impinge on my freedom. So there's always going to have to be a balance, and there should be a healthy debate around, you know, rights, responsibilities, the role of government, what we should do for ourselves and what we should do for each other. But this blanket idea that small government is the pinnacle of freedom is, again, I don't think a serious position to take.
Oh, it's nonsense as well. I mean, it's sometimes oversimplifying things does you a disservice, but, you know, so say to someone who wants small government, so would you be okay if your local fire department had one person? And they'd say, no. You know, would you be okay if your local library had 10 books in it? No. Well, because small is not always better. You know, sometimes there is waste and there is areas you can improve. Like often in a government department in New Zealand, middle management seems to take up a good chunk of budget, as opposed to maybe those on the, you know, on the actual ground doing the work. So I'm not saying, no one's saying it's perfect, but yeah, just this constant thing about small government being better. It's just nonsense. It's a talking point. It's a dictionary definition of a talking point, and it's not a smart one.
One thing, just quickly, another example is this: the United States Post Office, which is, you know, in the Constitution actually.
Yeah.
Found that they needed to have a way of communicating back in the day of horses and buggies. But there's all this talk about, you know, the US Post Office and how it runs at a loss of, you know, billions of dollars a year. But that's just not the right way to think about it, right? Like, it's public service, it costs money. That's what we have the taxpayer fisc to do. If you talk about it in that paradigm, then you think you're going to have a winning argument. But I think the paradigm is wrong. There are just some things that are going to cost money that the government does. And yes, it should be smart and it should be facile and it should be, you know, should be done the right way and not, you know, heavy bureaucracies. But it's a vital thing, and this is becoming obviously more important now with the US election and this idea that many more people are male. You know, the military is another example. Do we talk about the military costing us, you know, losing X number of, you know, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars a year? It's framed in a way, depending on who's talking about it and what they're talking about. But there are just some things that government does, and we got to let them get on with it. Keep an eye, of course, but it's just some things the government needs to do. Yeah.
Hey, look, we'll let you go. But just before we do, thanks to Hallmark, I managed to tweet out the other day, speaking of the post office, you know, it would appear to me that Trump and his cronies are trying to disband the post office at the moment because they're worried about losing. I'm making it easier for people to. I think the cornerstone of every politician should sign a document that says, I will do everything I can to make it easier for someone to vote, no matter what that is. But I realized, doing a little bit of research the other day, and I tweeted it out, they're worried about, you know, overloading the post office not being able to handle it. So I thought, I wonder how many Christmas cards get sent in December. And thanks to Hallmark, the US Post Office can seem to handle 1.3 billion Christmas cards every December. So, 130 million postal ballots, I think, should be fine.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful statistic. I'm gonna take that. And I'm gonna.
Before we go, I saw a headline the other day that said that potentially there's some talk starting about the Dems taking the Senate this upcoming election. Got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, there's a couple of seats that are looking problematic for Republicans. So Arizona is one example there. And it could happen. Susan Collins in Maine is also in a lot of trouble. So it's possible, if they take it, it'll be by a couple of seats. So they'll have a simple majority. And this is actually important to one of your earlier points about hope and change and the promise of Obama and then actually what happens. If you don't have the Senate and you don't have the House, as president, you're kind of stuck. And so with Obama, we saw those first 2 years, he certainly had the Senate. And then the midterms came, certainly we lost the House. We lost the Senate too. They, the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And then it was just uphill for 6 years. So it's vitally important for Joe Biden to flip the Senate. Democrats already have the House. They're in no danger of losing it. In fact, there may be gains in the House as well. And probably Joe Biden has 2 years to get done what he needs to get done, bring that progressive wing in, to talk about climate change, to actually do some of the things that he has, said he wants to do. But I suspect that we will see another 2-year window. We will see the midterms. This is just a historical pattern, and we may see, the pendulum swing back the other way, certainly as to the House.
All right. Hey, Danielle McLaughlin, if people want to find out more about you, connect with you, your Twitters and stuff, how do they do that?
Oh, would you like my handle? Is that?
Hey, whatever you want to do. If people want to follow you, do whatever.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Ms. D. McLaughlin. So that is MSD and then my last name, which is McLaughlin. I would love to connect with any and all. I don't block people, actually. I am in this for the conversation. Sometimes I'm in it to get, harassed, but that's okay. I think we got to talk to each other, because if we're not talking to each other and we're not talking across the aisle, then all, my friend, is lost.
Danielle, thanks for joining us. It's been fun.
Thanks, Pat.
Maybe we can do it again either before the election or maybe just after the election, and we'll have a bit of a touch base as to what's happening. All right, mate. Hey, be safe in New York, and we'll talk soon.
Be safe too. Take care, New Zealand.